turn up what I have here. But yes, if you get the Zoom client connected, then we will switch to the in-room audio here. Until then, let's go ahead and get started since we only have an hour. This is eBPF, yes. There are chairs over here. You just have to navigate to get to them. All right. So are you still trying to get a Zoom client set up? Okay, great.
Just trying to reboot if that helps.
All right, cool. I will go ahead and get started, but if you do, just let me know and I will turn off audio and stuff here once we switch. All right. Welcome to the eBPF standardization side meeting. Keyboard working here. By the way, this meeting is being recorded. Unless anybody has an objection, we have to disclose that to everybody. Part of your agreement in being here is you agree to be part of the recording. I would like a volunteer here to take notes. Ideally, 2 volunteers. Anybody in the room want to be a note taker? And I'm wondering if Mikola, you can also maybe be a note taker.
Yes, I will be taking notes.
Okay. Anybody else in the room here? Okay. Yep. Got one. KP, was that a question?
Is there a note stock? I can also help.
Coordinate with Mikola. I
So
think the note
let's
taker in the room will be using
KP, let's do it and let's share notes afterwards.
Yeah. All right. All right. This meeting has people at it from both the IETF community and the eBPF community, meaning the Linux kernel community and the eBPF in general. Most of the eBPF community is online. We have, oh, I got to, Christoph, you're waiting here. Let me admit you in case you want to help here. All right. We have 14 participants, some of which are both in the room and remote on the Zoom so far. So I've got a couple slides here and I've got a couple questions that I want to have discussion on. First, we said there's people here from eBPF Foundation. So just for anybody that's an IETF, what's the eBPF Foundation? This is a directed fund underneath the Linux Foundation that was created December 2021, whose purpose, this is from the charter, is to support open source, open data, and/or open standards projects. The BPF Steering Committee is the name for the technical body that's in the eBPF Foundation. And I see at least 3 members of the BPF Steering Committee in this meeting, between myself and Alexi and KP. Don't know if there's anybody else. If there's any other members of the BSC, speak up. And in the room here, yeah, if you don't fit, we have had Zoom, or you can stand. In the room, we have various IETF leadership people between a couple of area directors and Lars Zegert, the chair of the IETF. So if you're here from the eBPF community, we have, briefly turn the camera this way. It's a full room, right? Yeah. All right. This, all right. Yeah. All right. I'm going to keep going.
Yes.
The goal of this meeting is to try to determine what's the best place to publish specifications related to eBPF. Okay. The answer might or might not be IETF, which is why this is not an IETF meeting. This is an IETF side meeting. Okay. Different options that have been considered by those on the BPF steering committee include an eBPF Foundation document. To do an eBPF Foundation document and take that to say ISO, like some small SDOs do. Maybe do independent stream RFC or do an IETF RFC. Okay. Since some people have argued for D, we want to get the community together to say, is there actually any consensus that D is a good or bad or whatever idea? Because having a BOF, for example, would only make sense if we had consensus that D might actually be a good idea, right? And so the goal of this meeting is not to go into technical discussion of eBPF, except as it relates to trying to decide between those 4 options, or maybe a 5th option if somebody has one, okay? This is a process meeting. If you're on a technical one, you're in the wrong room. Although technical stuff was in scope of it informs this decision. Everybody understand what the goal of the meeting is? Okay, great. What would we be talking about candidates to standardize? These are the 7 bullets that I shared in eBPF office hours and the internet area meeting.
Did you mean to share something other than the Zoom?
I'm waiting for somebody else to share.
Okay, I need somebody to let me into the Zoom, please.
Okay, momentarily here. Okay, you should be able to be joined
All
now.
right, getting there.
So we will be projecting as soon as David gets on the Zoom file. Okay, those are the 7 bullets. You can see with the exception of maybe the bottom 2, they are not networking specific. The bottom 2, some things are networking specific and many are not.
The only person who sees them. No.
Right here. Okay, I will read them for you. The instruction set architecture, somewhat analogous to a Java VM. Number 2, an ELF file format or VL file format. This stuff is widely deployed, right? Number 3, BPF type format.
If you would share the screen into Zoom, it'll show up.
Very good. Thank you. And one of us should mute. Okay.
I'm muting.
Everybody good now?
Speaker on.
Turn your
Not mine. The volume down.
Put your volume down, yeah.
No, the other one. It's not this one.
All right, how we doing? Still got it.
Leave computer audio. There we go.
Yay. Okay. I will continue reading, but hopefully now you can see it from the back of the room. Yes? All right. BPF or BPF type format, compiler expectations, verifier expectations, cross-platform map types, which in case you're fuzzy on what that means, different data structures, prefix tables and things like that. And then cross-platform program types, okay? Those are the 7 things that are potentially candidates for standardization. Okay?
And they all should be standardized in the same place.
Not necessarily, no. So here are the set of questions I'm going to ask, but I don't want the discussion now. I want to give enough background for people to get them on the same page on the different options here. But these are the questions that I know of. There may be other ones people have, okay? So is any of this in scope for the IETF? So you might be able to say, well, 1 and 3 or something are in scope for the IETF and the other ones are not. That's possible. You can take a different approach for each of the 4 things. Are the IETF copyright and IPR rules okay? Is the speed of publication okay? Is the consensus process okay? And by the way, eBPF is still evolving with new things being added constantly. Can standards keep up with implementation? Okay. Those are some of the popular, frequently asked questions. Okay. And so remember, out of those 4 options here, I had a slide on each of those because we do have people from the eBPF community here. I got to admit 2 more people here. Okay. All right. So maybe a slide on each of those. The history of the documents right now. Historically, all the documents were in the Linux kernel source tree. Okay, that's kernel.org. To submit stuff into the document process, you post a patch list to the BPF mailing list where it gets reviewed and then merged, right? That's the historical answer, okay? Because the BPF documentations are part of the Linux kernel. Recently, the eBPF Foundation, we created a GitHub repository, right? Since the Linux kernel doesn't use GitHub for this, it uses it for the test suite, but that's neither here nor there for this purpose. Okay. There's a GitHub fork which mirrors that. And right now we're in the middle of updating the process here, or creating the process, right? So there's now a PDF auto generation that when stuff gets put into the main branch of GitHub, the PDF gets generated, okay? And so this would continue to be built out, and this is basically option A, okay, which is BPF Foundation, whatever, these things are a mirror, and the PDF gets generated from whatever is in the GitHub copy, okay? This is option A, okay? Next option is to say, well, you might do all of that, and then at the end of the day, go to ISO, and how does that work? And I am not an expert in this, but I looked around in case somebody else is here. Feel free to do that, but here's what I understand in one slide. Since this is not about getting ISO to actually create a working group or anything, it is popular for small SDOs to take a document that they've already done, take it to ISO to get an ISO number so that can be referenced by international standards. Well, how does that work? The organization applies to become a publicly available specification or PAS submitter. Okay. Notably, the Linux Foundation used to be one of those, but that expired in 2008. W3C and OCF are other examples, and those are links that I can send out the slides afterwards. I hope those taking notes can get the names of people both online and remote. The because there's not a mailing list for this yet. Other than I would say right now, the mailing list is the BPF mailing list, bpf@beecher.kernel.org. Okay.
Clarifying question?
Yeah.
Do these ISO documents get charged? Are they freely available?
Yes. Once they are published, then they, to my knowledge, they are freely available. Yes.
Can they be updated?
Yes, they are updated by refollowing the same process, just like asking the question, can RFC be updated? You can obsolete it with a newer version of it. Yes. Okay. So there are other organizations that do this, and the links there go to their processes talking about how they did it. Here's the template that we filled out and did that stuff. Notably, OCF cites that after they submitted to ISO, it took them 17 months to get ISO to publish it without changes.
They have a meeting.
Yeah. So it's not super fast, right? But it does mean it's an international standard. And so that's the disadvantage here, is that even after you're done, it takes, a long time to actually get an ISO number. Okay. All right. So that's B.
Not sure they're all
That's a good question.
These ones are. That's
Yeah.
publicly available.
The passwords.
It's public, it's not freely available. As far as I know, no ISO standard freely available.
Okay.
You always have to pay, and a lot of the organizations
That's actually-
publish their last working draft.
Yeah, that's true.
That's what I.
Yeah. I've heard that too, that organizations say, this is the same document that appears in ISO. You get it from us for free. You want the certified one, you go and pay for it, and you'll just get the same document with the ISO, stamp on it.
The other thing is that ISO numbers stay fixed, and we revise it, the number doesn't change, it is changed, it's changed.
Yeah, it'd be saying like RFC 5378-2008, right? And it's the -2008 says it's that iteration, or maybe BCP 78-2008 would be a better example, right? Because BCPs, you can read the same number. Okay. So that's the ISO process. The ones that people here in the room tend to know, and the people remote might not. Let me click to admit Karsten. You're trying to join them multiple times here. All right. Next one is the RFC process. Roughly, you want the details, go and read the the TAO or the RFC. But C and D were independent submission stream, which cannot do standards. They can do RFCs. So if all you care about is an RFC, then you could go independent submission stream. So that's that one that goes through a number of steps here. But notably, both of these cases require submission in the format of internet draft, which the BPF docs are not currently. The IETF stream is the one that people in the room here are the most familiar with, which has a long list of steps here that, again, starts with formatting as an internet draft. Once it becomes an IETF internet draft, that's when all the IETF process rules, intellectual property rules, copyright rules actually apply, is at that stage.
That's submission.
Well, yes.
Even for individual documents, not at adoption, but that's submission.
Okay.
Sorry.
That's correct.
All right. By the way, you might want to update the wording in the TAO.
At the top.
Oh,
In the TAO.
Okay. Why not?
All right.
Sorry.
The IETF option summary, in case you are new to the IETF, because there are people remote that are not IETF experts. This is from the TAO of the IETF. On the copyright issue, the rule is, this is roughly quoted. I tried to collapse it into one slide, so hopefully I didn't break the wording too much. The IETF and the document authors both own the copyright, okay? Meaning both of them can independently do whatever they want with the text, okay? Including the right to create derivative works is the notable one, okay? So by putting something in that draft, you're granting the IETF the right to do derivative works, whether you like it or not. Different point is that IETF will typically not do derivative works unless it has the key community that actually has consensus on that. So the IETF, anybody that's a participant, if you're personally aware of patents on things that are in the document and you participate in the discussion, you're obligated to disclose that. This doesn't happen very much in it, well, I should say, in the context of the things related to BPF, right? It's unlikely, but it is possible. The IETF takes no positions on patents themselves. People can use that in their decisions, but the IETF as an organization has not taken any position on patents. And the documents themselves do not mention patents, right? The website, the metadata does, but the documents themselves never talk about patents. Okay. All right. Is stuff in scope for the IETF was the first question. Okay. Some interesting comparable points, because you might say it doesn't look like it's in scope, or maybe it does. Here's 4 interesting cases from the IETF. Okay. The first one is a standards track virtual machine. In fact, the quote says it's much like the Java virtual machine. Okay, so that one's kind of interesting. But this is one that is specifically designed for doing network compression and decompression as opposed to a general purpose virtual machine. Okay, so it's kind of similar, but not quite the same as like an eBPF virtual machine. Second example is an API. This is C APIs. In particular, this one is not a standard. This one is informational. The standard is over in ISO. Okay. Because the IETF does not do C API standards. It can do abstract API standards and conceptual API standards, and we do have other examples there. But for the literal ones, the IETF doesn't do that. Okay.
We can do everything.
What's that?
We can do everything.
We can, we don't currently, right? So like TAPS does abstract APIs, GSS API was an abstract API, TEEP has abstract APIs, and so, but the language specific bindings are in the language organizations. Okay.
We have actually published RFCs that have not pseudocode but code in them. That is more than an API, so there is actually that sort of the codec stuff, right?
Yep.
493 is an API document, API ring for blah, blah, blah.
So actually, sorry, follow up. That link actually has an RFC, so the netting specification is an RFC.
Okay. If you can look up the number, if you can look up the number, if we can get that into the notes, that would be very helpful. All right.
Dave, it's hard to hear people from the audience.
Okay. The person noted that Netlink has an RFC. And there's people looking up, is that a standards track or informational RFC? Okay. Well, once you find the answer, let us know.
Is there a chance we can leave the door open just for
Yeah.
airflow? That would be excellent.
Yep.
Thank you.
And then the other examples here, you can see JSON has one, but it's also in ECMA. And the last one, since ELF file format was one of the bullets, then the IETF does have cases where there are file formats, right? Not protocols, but file formats. And that's an example of one of those. Okay? And so this may inform your decision as to whether you think any of those bullets are in scope for IETF or not. Okay. Lastly, in determining whether the IETF is the right place, right? It's useful to look at the goals of a BOF, since that's the process for major groups of work, right? And two key questions in formation of a BOF is the community agrees that IETF is the right group. And if there's a critical mass of participants willing to work on the problem, meaning there's a critical mass of participants willing to work on the problem in the IETF, okay? And so those are the main questions when determining whether a BOF is there, and the area directors are the ones that finally make the judgment call there. Okay, now we're back to those same questions, and we're ready for open discussion. If you are remote, use the hand raised. If you're in the room, use a physical hand raised, and then I will try to merge the two queues. Okay.
I think Lars. I have my hand raised.
Lars, okay.
Where's your mic? Is it here?
Lars, right now the mic is here. Yes. So let's get you on camera.
Just stand a little bit. So I'm Lars Eckert. I'm the chair of the IETF, and I'm sort of a little bit involved here because we chatted about this at the Linux kernel summit in Dublin. So I think this is in scope of the IETF, and if not, then the scope of the IETF needs to change, so it can be. I'm not kidding, right? Because so my meta level here is that the IETF needs to bring in new work that's relevant for the industry, right? And if that new work doesn't fit, that seems like a stupid reason to not like change the shape of work that can fit, right? So I think this is a solvable problem. I think the copyright rules are okay. The speed of publication is something that we invite you to talk. It depends on how frequently you need to ref the RFCs. For Quick, we did a GitHub-based process that looked very much like your option A, where we basically had a editor's copy that we only merged stuff in that had consensus, and that was basically what people implemented against.
It's hard for people to hear you, it says.
Okay, I'm sorry.
He's sitting next to the mic, so
I'm gonna go down. So
There you
basically, we have examples of working groups that use processes that look very much like your option A. And so if the working group got started, you could like decide to do this, right? Because it's a consensus-based process. And the consensus process to me seems fine. It's up for you to decide. And the evolution bullet point comes back to like how quickly do you ref things, and I think the GitHub approach would work for that since it works currently. Thank you.
okay, Sharon, you're up next. Remote.
Yeah, hi, how are you? Good to see you. I've been following eBPF for the last year very closely. I have a question for you though. Are you open to standardize an interface, which is what the IETF does, to solve a problem using the eBPF particular set of skills that you are very familiar with in depth. So it requires work. It's not for the sake of eBPF on its own, but it's a sake to solve a problem using an interface that relies heavily on eBPF abilities. And I can think of a few examples if you need.
Examples would help.
Yeah.
Examples will help.
AP said example will help.
Yeah, so let me give you an example. People porting from cloud environments to edge environments. There are no streams which are edge grade. We could combine routing and eBPF to create portable streams in the edge, so that there'll be unicast streams and multicast streams. The unicast streams will trigger eBPF functions upon assembly of a full frame to have a fast reaction to events on the ground. And a multicast stream will use routing interface to create push notification using the routing infrastructure for those messages. So that's like one example.
Okay, so I'm going to try to reflect what I think the question was, or what I think the relationship is. Out of those bullets on the other slide that had the 7 possibilities or so, one of those was program types, some of which are networking specific. And so I think, Sharon, when you're talking about interfaces for doing things like multicast streams, unicast streams, you're talking about networking specific program types, and whether, and you use the term interface, but I think that's what you're talking about is, can you do a networking specific program type for, I would like to hook, network streams or, socket sends or, packet receives or whatever.
Not this way. People use eBPF to implement all kinds of RFCs.
Yep.
That's not new. But think of like Kafka, okay, which runs in the cloud, heavily relies on all kinds of cloud services and all that. Doesn't work in the edge. So a stream will be a topic with an address which is logical. A stream object will be portable. We can move it around from edge to edge. And it will leverage eBPF ability to assemble packets to a frame and then trigger a function like a FAS to deal with that frame. And I have in mind like all kinds of use cases in all sorts of like automotive. Very helpful. Probably will be implemented as a proprietary code, but very useful as a standard interface of Kafka-like streams, only low level based on routing and eBPF's special capability. That's
okay. Thank you. I think KP has his hand up. So let's say, KP, you want to weigh in on this, or?
If I understand correctly, you're saying that this eBPF code will run on the routing equipment itself. This is on the edge. It'll run on the router. I think like before, my take on this is
okay, let me correct immediately. No, it will run on Linux.
Okay.
It will be an object portable by Cilium.
Okay.
But what's interesting about it is that it has a logical address associated with it, meaning no matter where I move it, whoever sends packet to that topic, it will reach it. Okay, so like I can have I can sample the engines of a city. So the city has millions of engines. 99% of them are off at night. Okay, but during commute, all of them send instrumentation. So I can have an elastic structure, and the vehicles will send to their topic, which is their engine, packets of their instrumentation, and I can handle elasticity in a fragmented environment like the edge, not like the clouds, because I cannot concentrate traffic.
So I do want to keep the discussion not in too many technical
Right.
details,
I didn't want to
keep
go
it up
there.
level that is, it affects the questions here, and we have a hand raised here in the room. And so I'm going to give the time to Eric here for a second. So talk loud.
Okay.
Or make your way around here. Otherwise, if you talk loud, I'll just repeat. So
I just wanted to say that I was a little bit confused. It seemed like we were getting kind of technical.
Yeah.
I wanted to suggest at a very minimum, we have art area. Does all of this stuff theoretically fit under an application?
No, not exactly. This is like part of a hot
We'll
routing
find an
topic.
area for it.
Yeah,
I don't
Find an area.
think,
Yeah,
so I don't think that is gonna be the problem, right?
I don't think that's a I don't think that's.
I take it that means the remote people actually heard Eric's question. The reason that I gave the advertisement for the side meeting in both int area and art area is there are use cases in both, right? Where eBPF is used for networking and non-networking things. So some of the networking uses, like for packets and so on, fall more logically under the internet area. The use for non-networking things, say file systems and things, is more useful for, say, where is NFSv4 right now? I think that's transport area, right?
Yes.
And so the point is, different working groups in different areas, the answer might be, well, all of them, right? And so where do you do things that would be classified as program types that might be specific to storage or networking or some other application, the application area, right? And in that sense, it's a little bit like, where do I do DHCP options, right? There's a general working group, but the answer is in the working group that's the experts in the area, right? Okay.
Yeah, I'm not going into the specific logic that will be triggered by such a stream
right.
object.
Yes.
Just
pause for a second here. Just pause for a second here. We're going to switch audio to a different device. So I'm going to mute mine so people won't be able to hear you for a second here.
Because I'm not joined.
Oh, okay, keep going for another minute. Let me know when you're ready to try again. All right, how about now? Okay.
Same for us.
Okay.
So, is this working better for anyone?
Yes, it sounds awesome.
Okay,
Well, not
great.
because I'm
Thank
close.
you.
We can hear them better too.
Yay. Okay, please resume. So I was just summarizing, feel free to, where we're at, that what area would things make sense in? And the answer is it depends. I was giving an analogy to what areas do DHCP options. The answer is, well, potentially all of them, right?
Yeah, but this specific example is more like a routing area. It's part of a new area in routing, compute-aware routing. So yeah, it touches on art a little bit, but mostly it's about something like Kafka, but at the network layer, and it will require something like eBPF. I can give you another example from the network management area. People are now building twins, I'm sorry to repeat that theme, of all kinds of network constructs, but there is no twins of a subnet conversation. So that can be an interface that uses IPFix sampling in order to create that image of the conversation of a subnet, which is scattered all over using eBPF object. So that's another example. The question is, are you open to specifying an RFC, either in NM area or in routing area, which is not about the eBPF, but heavily relies on eBPF constructs, the queuing, the filtering, the logic, the maps, all that stuff, the latency, the portability, and all that.
Are you saying that you want another candidate
Okay, hold
document
on.
type here?
We have a long queue now, and so I do want to hear from other people, and so I just asked for notes so I can keep track of it. We have five people in queue now.
Okay,
Lorenzo, Mikola remote, and then was it Suresh? Okay, in that order. Sorry, David Black, then Suresh.
so I don't see an obvious reason why it couldn't be in the IETF. I think there's a lot of expertise overlap, so like it could actually provide benefits. But I don't understand enough about this technical topic to understand if it's like that's the question you asked, what's the best place for it, right? Is like you showed this process with where the PDF is automatically generated. Is that the only documentation that you have right now?
No. Today there exists a bunch of different files in the Linux kernel repository. Right now there's a PDF being generated for one of them to prove that it can that the PDF generation process works. But right now those are like 7 different
So it's a,
RST
it's a
files.
documentation in the Linux kernel code.
Correct.
Okay, thanks.
All right, Lorenzo.
So for standards, the things that are important for standards are, I think there's a couple things. Number one is disrupt, right? Like you need a neutral party that basically has the standards so that different implementations can interrupt, right? And the second that's very important, I think no one said anything about this, is like the backwards compatibility implications, right? Like one question that I had is like, what are the backwards compatibility guarantees that BPF provides today? My guess is kind of like, it's like similar to the Linux backwards guarantee, like never break user space, but it kind of tends to break. I think that's one thing where like the backwards compatibility guarantees would inform how we do the documents, right? Because, for example, if you say like this is guaranteed forever, like some of the Linux APIs are basically guaranteed forever, like the system call API, then that is a very good fit for an RFC that says this will always work, and you can have another RFC that adds new fields, new types, and things like that. So something like the ISA is a very good fit. Some of the other things maybe, I don't know, evolve more quickly.
Okay, Nicola, your turn.
Yeah, I wanted to touch on what Lorenzo mentioned, but before this, so can we have this conversation without too many technical details, right? Because we have high-level questions to answer. And getting back to what Lorenzo mentioned, it's not true that ISA is stable. And this is what we discussed with Alexei before. Like we already had at least 4 revisions of the ISA, and we want to have option to change it in future. Regarding if there is, like, we are not going to break the user space, but I'm not sure how many of guarantees we can provide and we want to provide. I think we need to discuss this.
David.
I think all of this can be done here. And I think Dave's suggestion that there's a core working group somewhere, art strikes me as a good area for it, plus some applied working groups with some of the applications that clearly fit in other areas would be a good structure. I think there's flexibility among these documents. We have all kinds of experience doing guidelines for this and that, so I don't think the expectations for the compiler and verifier are problems. So, yeah.
Okay. Suresh?
Yeah, so I have actually 2 things in mind. I'll go with the easier one first. I really think the routing area is a better bet for this one because it has done something similar. The netlink is one example, but there's also another one which is TIPSI. So I don't know if you guys on the Linux community know TIPSI. Like TIPSI is another protocol for like kind of like Kafka kind of things. I think Sharon you talked about, right? So it talks about like services and instances and so on. It's also being done in routing in Forces, right? So that's one thing. The second thing is like more for people from the eBPF side to think about is like the change control. Okay, by bringing it to IETF and putting it in a working group, you're seeding change control. So it's not some maintainer approving some changes or not approving some changes. Like anybody from the IETF, from any group can come and walk in and have a discussion about something, right? So, and everybody who's in the maintainer thing could be in the rough, right? If there's like sufficient technical reason. I think that's something you need to consider, like, because like you need to do the work here. Right? There's no like parallel approval track or like rejection track. So that's something, just think about it a little bit. And the last thing is really the update thing. So I don't know who said that. I think it was it Nicola who said we did 4 changes?
I'll comment on that.
Yeah. So like, I think like depends on the time scale. If you did this in like 6 years, the 4 backward incompatible changes, I think it's fine for an IETF process to go through it. But if you did it in 6 months, it's not.
Thanks. So Q is right now me and you. So I was going to elaborate on Nicola's point since I've done some of the mods recently to the ISA document to update it. There's 2 types of modifications that have been done to ISA. Some of those are in the breaking change category. So what you do if something tries to divide by 0, okay? The behavior of that did change, okay? Now if you divide, the answer, by the way, is if you divide by 0, the answer is equal to 0, right? Where previously it was abort program. So that's an example of something that's very rare. More commonly is addition of new instructions to the instruction set, which is not a breaking change, right? And so as long as the breaking change is to, for example, take something that was illegal and to make it be legal, okay, then that's not a breaking change, okay? And so that way it means that you can do things as extensions over time and it's safe, and then I don't see any issues there, right? Anytime that you make a breaking change, then of course you have backwards compatibility concerns. That's, I think, what Lorenzo was talking about, right? On the change control point, since I'm already in queue here, I would say, as long as the Linux kernel community participates in the consensus process and they're part of the community, right? And so the IETF doesn't do things unless it has consensus, right? If a significant number of technical people, and it turns out that the eBPF Foundation is from a lot of the major projects that deal with eBPF. And so if that community is also participating, then my personal opinion is the risk is low that the two communities will diverge as long as you have sufficient overlap in participation. Okay? And so it is theoretically possible, but my belief is that the risk should be low as long as we encourage enough cross-participation, right? Which gets to that question forming a BOF. Do you have sufficient representation from the communities that would have to make the change, right? If the dominant deployment is Linux and the Linux says we can't make that change for reason X, then the people doing the standards are like, well, why are we doing this for if they're not going to implement it, right? And so the IETF has that culture. So while it's possible, I would think that the risk is low and manageable. That's my opinion. Okay. Go ahead.
Yeah.
So, okay. Eric, you're in queue after that.
So speaking as the person who did the last round of changes before Dave,
Yep.
I think the divide by zero is an interesting example for how the process works. I mean, because we changed the factual behavior that wasn't documented before. And that's another thing that happens a lot in standards, is that you do have behavior that was not specified, usually because people forgot about it.
That's actually
sometimes
it's a
deliberately.
non-breaking change. It's crashing. It's the same as your non-breaking change. You said like it didn't used to work and now it works.
Well,
So it does work.
Yeah.
From the standards perspective, it went from being undefined to defined. From the implementations perspective, it went from being undefined with behavior A to undefined with behavior B to defined with behavior B, right?
Right. And I mean, the other thing, as someone who's active a little in IETF and a lot in Linux, is that how the community works in many ways is actually surprisingly similar, right? I mean, even in Linux, say for eBPF in concrete, we have Alexei sending to the network maintainers, sending to Linus Torvalds, and if the network maintainer doesn't take it, it's like your working group chair gets in the way. And if Linus doesn't take it, it's one of the higher IETF buddies just saying no, and he's going to overrule you. It doesn't really happen unless you really fuck up, but it's possible. So a lot of how this works, and the details might be different, but the fundamental structure of a rough community consensus with a few people that are more in charge than others is how it works in both venues.
Okay.
Can you please say who was just talking, because it's not clear.
Yeah, please state your name. Yeah. Whether you're remote or local, please state your name after this. So, Eric Klein.
Okay, Eric Klein, just 4 very small points. One, Suresh is right. Netlink was done inside the forwarding and control element separation, or forces working group, which is inside the routing area. That seems interesting. Secondly, I'll note that like you definitely don't have to wait for full publication to actually do an implementation. And Quick is an excellent example of this. People implement draft level stuff all the time. And third thing, something like a new instruction set is just another document that takes another code point, and that's the way you go. And the fourth thing was a process suggestion, which was if you don't want to jump into the swimming pool and you just want to stick your toe in, you could pick one document and try to run through the process and see how it goes. I mean, it's maybe a lot of work to set up a working group or do whatever, but it might be a way to try before you go all in. I think Paul is there.
So,
Yep.
So it's
Paul,
Paul,
and then
Lorenzo,
Lorenzo,
and then Lucas.
Lucas, okay. And Mikola, is your hand still up from before, or is this a new hand, Mikola?
It's a new hand. It's
Okay.
Mikola.
I'll put you in queue and call on you because we got a couple people that have.
You want me to manage the queue?
Sure. I'm gonna manage the queue. All right. Let's stick you right after Lorenzo. So we got Eric, Paul, Lorenzo, Mikola, and Lucas.
Lucas, yeah.
Oh, I'm done. Sorry.
So, two things. So it is interesting that the change control subtly changes, right? So you explain how if Linus Torvalds doesn't like it, he might put a veto on it. But once you move this into an IETF process, that becomes different. And so one risk that you hear out is that you have IETF consensus to do A, and Linux says like, no, we won't do it, or one person says we will never do this. So it is important to think about the concept of consensus. Now, obviously, if this is eBPF and the Linux community doesn't agree on doing this, then clearly you have no consensus, right? So that document couldn't move inside the IETF because there's no consensus. But there are also use cases possible. So let's say let's say SunOS wants to implement this, and they do this, and they have different requirements. And then if then the Linux side says like, well, we don't want to support that use case because that's silly, then you run into interesting problems where implementation and specification might deviate. So just a thought there.
Next. Next is Lorenzo.
Yeah, I wanted to say, is there something that for the BPF question for the BPF folks on the Zoom, right? Lorenzo Colleague, sorry. Is there something that you're ready to write down, like the ISA maybe?
They're already written down.
Yeah. So, and could we take those through, mock? Like for example, one of the things that happened in for HTTP or HTTP3, right? They were designed proprietary by Google, which is like not a community process, different, right? But they came to the IETF and they turned into standards. Is there one or some set of documents that we could like canary in this process? Right?
Yes. So that everything on here has some place in the document. Is it complete? No. But all of these have some things that are out there and they're scattered around and so on.
I think they're vaguely in order of.
Okay, so let me ask
Correct.
again.
They're
Is there
vaguely in
something
order
that,
of completeness.
okay, is there something that someone wants to work on first?
Yes.
There's current people working on ISA. Okay, Christoph before and now me, and Quentin, who's also on here, has been helping. The bottom ones, I think Donald Hunter has been working on the map types actively. So we've seen people working on multiple of these. I've actually started on this one. So all of these are in progress or will be in progress at some point in the future. This one right here is the one that is arguably the one that, like Chris said, this is arguably the order of rough completeness, but not quite. And so this is probably the canary. If this was in scope, then the first one is probably the one that's most appropriate to do the canary.
I mean, like Netlink came through the IETF. Maybe we should try to push that one through the instruction set. This is just a thought.
Okay, thanks. So next is Migla, remote, please go ahead.
Yeah. So I think what we also wanted to know from the BPF community, why we need to do the standard in the first place. I think there were some considerations from the hardware vendors that IETF might be required. Can we elaborate on this?
Does anybody want to answer that from the eBPF community? Yeah, Christoph, go ahead.
Go ahead.
Well, so not really speaking for the IETF community, but maybe the broader standards community. So in NVMe, we have a need where people want to be able to download eBPF into, in this case, storage hardware, not even networking hardware. But I've heard a lot of similar ideas from the networking community. And for anything where you have one standard or industry specification, in case of NVMe, you really need a standards document to reference. And I can speak for the standards I work with and industry specifications. We really like IETF specs compared to ISO specs or other things.
So that's one answer, which is external SDOs, and the other answer is cross-platform, right? It's been classified Linux, but we also have Windows implementation. We want it to be the same, and when there's gaps in the document right now, you can't necessarily do it the same. Okay? The more the gaps get filled, the more you can do it the same. That's what we want.
You need a standard anytime you have like more than one vendor.
Yep.
And the implementations need to interoperate. And like IETF does interop. They know how to do it, right?
Yep.
I think.
Okay, I think next Lucas, go ahead.
I have one more. I'm sorry. Okay. I want to clarify one more thing. Would standard published through eBPF Foundation suffice in this case? Like, let's say if we have a PDF document of a standard that is versioned and we publish it through BPF Foundation, will it make any difference?
So if I can like quickly interject, right? Like you're going to reproduce the things that IETF has already put together, right? Like, stable references, like, ways of doing archival, you're putting this back together. You can, but like just to interject on that, but I think Lucas has a point.
Yeah, just to say, I work at Cloudflare. We love BPF there. Thanks to the folks that work on it. I think this initiative is really good, and they're trying to get better. I don't know what the word is. Collaboration and documentation somewhere is great. IETF possibly. I think the things that we like to do is BPF and networking code. So it's almost, what I didn't understand from the documents is the dependencies and interlinkage. When I came here, we're getting back my idea of it, but almost maybe you want to turn it upside down and work on the interesting thing of networking. I understand there's core things that are really needed to make that document work that probably have to be defined, but like from a application wanting to use the network or for routing functionality in BPF, maybe you would get more input from the IETF community because they're used to networking, not defining instruction sets.
Yeah. Okay, but we're getting kicked out of the room in 10 minutes, and so we do have a queue. We just want to make sure we manage the queue, that everybody gets a chance to speak. So, by the way, Jim, you're in queue, but not next. So.
Yeah, queue's cut. Yeah, thank you. Okay, so next, Tero, go ahead.
So this document, most of my questions were already asked. I was actually answered. I was actually trying to ask, what is IETF bringing to this work? And I get an answer back that, okay, you get an RFC label, so you can actually refer it. And perhaps you get some more people to actually interested in this and working it. If my understanding is that most of the works is still not really good, properly defined. And before we can actually publish it as an RFC, it has to be properly defined that there's multiple people who are actually checking it, that it is consistent at that. So I was thinking about, is that enough reason to go to the IETF, because it adds quite a lot of more process and work. I mean, the Linux community people has to actually, they are the only one who can actually write the specifications still and the documents. So they have to be able to write they have to be committed to write the RFC or the ITER drafts and answer the stupid questions for IETF for saying, oh, why the hell you are doing this and why are you not doing that, and this would be much better. He would say, but we have been doing this 10 years now and we don't want to change it.
Okay. Did you want to answer something there, or like should I?
Right now, the task is to document existing practice as opposed to invent new practice.
Yeah. Okay. Thanks. I think Gyan, you're next.
Remote.
Go ahead.
Yes. Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Yes.
Yes. So I had a question. So I think the big question related to IETF and the reasons why to bring this work to the IETF. So the one thing that I think had been mentioned, but I think does come into play is, I think, would let's say the eBPF programmability, if we end up porting that, because I think most of the use cases that I've seen, I think it's mostly on like the Linux kernel and running on compute nodes. But if there's a desire, and it probably is, and I can see definitely that would be the direction. But let's say if we want to take the eBPF processes and functions and the entire, I guess, all of eBPF and all the components, but actually port that onto router platforms. And if that's something that we do plan to do and I work, in the routing area across, quite a number of different working groups, I would say that would definitely be a reason for interoperability if it's something that we plan to port. The other question that I had was eBPF. It's more so programmability, and I guess if you try to draw an analogy between, let's say, routing protocols. So when like in the routing area, you have protocols and protocol specs that are developed, and then you have different types of programming languages that you can develop, that in code. Like say, like there's different like open BGP or open routing like FRR and a variety of different open routing platforms that you can actually develop. So I guess eBPF, let's say, could be one of those, and it could be part of, let's say, an open platform where you're developing. But if it's actually like, let's say, on the development side where you're really software development, that you're developing software, and then I guess you have the onus on the Linux Foundation and CNCF, that if the onus and I guess the any change that happens is with the Linux Foundation, then really definitely they would have to step up to the plate for any changes. But I think that really the big one is for IETF and routing area. If it's going into routing area, it would have to be something that would help with interoperability. And it's really protocol specification. So if you're if eBPF is going to be playing into protocols, which I don't see it being playing into protocols, but helping with development. I kind of see an analogy. If you draw an analogy with eBPF to let's say P4 programming, which is like ASIC programming and really is beneficial for optimization, ASIC optimization for fixed function ASICs, where you want to avoid having recirculation of packets, and you want to do like you want to be able to do like pipelining, so you're actually avoiding that recirculation. So that's like a hardware specific application, but P4 is not something that we'd bring to the IETF because it's not really, but it does help in routing and it does help the hardware because now you're optimizing the ASICs and now you're avoiding recirculation. So there's a lot of optimizations there. I can see eBPF being something like that, but does that really need to come to the standards? And I overall, the big one is interoperability. Anything that's brought to the standards, whenever you have two vendors, you really want to have standardization. But I think that, so the overall is really, does it really come into play here, interoperability? And I don't know.
So,
the answer.
Again, we need just to close on that, right? Like, so, like, I think you brought up the points, like, you know, one of them is like on the hardware. So, like, people did bring up a use case for storage hardware and routers before. So that's something that was brought up. And also the interop angle was also brought up. So, like, I think that those have been covered. And so thanks for that. I think Kiran will take a note, and I think we should move on because we need to close. Thanks.
Okay, thank you.
Lorenzo?
Yeah, I mean, I think mostly been said already, but you know, we use like eBPF a fair amount on Android. It'd be nice if we could get, like, for example, the chipset vendors to implement that. So then instead of doing it in the Linux kernel, we can do it in the Wi-Fi hardware, right? Like that would be nice, right?
Yes.
Yeah. And for that, you need interop and you need a specific destination.
Yeah.
And the same thing, like, it would be nice if you could run your load balancer on Cisco hardware or on Juniper hardware or on Arista hardware or on Linux kernel, right? Like, you know, that would be super useful.
Thank you. Thanks, Lorenzo. Christoph, go ahead.
Yeah, so in addition to the interop thing, which is really required for basically every non-Linux kernel eBPF use case, the other huge advantage I see in eBPF over just putting out a document is that I found the eBPF process having a lot of extremely useful review from people that are not domain experts, see this thing the first time and ask good questions because they haven't. And in terms of overhead, so I think I already told that to a few people, but if we take this into IETF, I definitely volunteer as a lead author, at least for the instruction set, and listen to the existing contributors.
Kiran, make sure that's noted. Who said that?
Christoph. Who else is in queue?
There's Eric, and that's it.
Okay, and after that, I would like to, just in case there's anybody else in the BPF steering committee, since that's who is kind of over it right now, if they have any last words, then feel free to put your hand up to potentially do it. Otherwise, the queue is cut. But since we had a bunch of area directors weigh in on the last part, if there's anybody from the BPF steering committee, you know, Alex or KP, if you have any last comment, you'll have 1 minute. So go ahead.
So Eric Klein, I just want to make 3 last little points that end up actually recommending routing area. And I was and here's why. The previous comment about programming made me think that, like, eventually it would be nice if we had, you know, some of this stuff maybe in IPv6 or in SRv6 where we had, like, here's how the packet does this thing, and people always say, oh, you can't process hop by hop options in hardware this way. And if we could, like, say, oh, here's how you can do it at eBPF program to do this behavior we want, then we would actually improve the quality of our own documents. And lastly, I read this stuff all the time in every single SRv6 network programming document. If the hop count is less than or equal to 1, then do this. Generate ASP or exit processing, blah, blah, blah. And all these steps by steps by steps. And it would be great if that were not just narrative, but also eBPF code. So I think SRv6 would be like a great example for where all these eBPF stuff could line up with.
And if you want an RFC number, it's 18986 for the people who are remote.
And for anybody remote, eBPF, there was a hackathon last weekend, and eBPF was explicitly mentioned in the hackathon wrap-up slides, and at least 2 or 3 different presentations. There was people at the hackathon using eBPF to implement standards, and this was one of them that was just mentioned. So. Yeah. All right. Alexi or KP, do you have anything you want to add, or do you want to summarize here from your side?
Nothing from my side. I think this is a good discussion. We should start with the ISA, standardizing the ISA. So this is great.
Okay. Alexi, anything you want to add?
Yeah, sounds like we will definitely have to continue this discussion. 1 hour was obviously not enough. Like 2 interesting things I've heard so far that I don't think we've considered in the past is standardizing BPF instruction set to be able to standardize other things in IETF. So to use to sort of self-refer, which is quite an interesting idea. And another part is whether, let's say, if like routing or protocol related working group in IETF that wants to refer to BPF, whether it's possible to do without BPF itself, like even instruction setter would be in part of IETF. So that's another consideration to wait. That's but yeah, it was an excellent discussion. Lots of interesting points. Thank you, everyone.
Thanks.
All right, thanks. For follow-up discussion, assuming I didn't make any typos from memory, right, Christoph, I mean, this is the mailing list, right? bpf@vtur.kernel.org, right? We already have one. Any discussion goes there, and we can have a follow-up meeting on probably a Thursday morning, what is it, like 9 a.m. Pacific, whatever the BPF office hour slot is. I'm in zone challenge right now in London.
Yeah, it's 9 a.m. Pacific on Thursday.
Yeah.
That's correct.
Can I make a recommendation before we close?
Yep, go ahead.
Would it be possible for either you or Christoph to request a non-working group mailing list from an AD? Like, I think like Eric can approve it. Somebody,
I
any AD can
didn't
approve
even
it.
know it exists, but we'll make sure it
The
happens.
question
Okay, so
is,
this is for non-working group
we
mailing
can
list.
talk about this out in the hall. I think there's other group that has
Yep.
this booked here. But the question is, why would you want 2 mailing lists for fragment discussion rather than 1? That's the question. Okay.
For process.
Dave, if you still hear me, how we share the notes with you? I guess he doesn't.
But if you're on the mailing list, then please stay on the hall for a second. Let's actually.
Yeah, I think something happened there.
Yep. I think they moved from the room and
Yeah, it's hard to discuss this way. It's very frantic. Maybe a mailing list dedicated to this side meeting.
yeah, I think
You can
there are
easily
still-
have a mailing list dedicated for that on IETF without a working group.
Yeah, you don't need a working group to start a mailing list. No?
No, we don't have working group. No, we don't
No,
have working.
But you don't need a working group to have a mailing list to discuss this.
Right.
Okay, I think they officially dropped out now.
Yeah.
Alexei, we cannot hear you because you are muted if you're talking.
No, I'm not saying anything. We just like here in the room, like debrief.
Like one thing that we didn't answer today is what is the commitment of BPF community for, once if we go through this process and publish the RFC, what will be the commitment of BPF community going forward? And we can probably move it either to the mailing list discussion or discuss it in the BPF office hours.
Yeah,
Probably-
that's what I was looking
probably
for. The
office
commitment
hours.
to do work, to write specs not of eBPF, but whatever is valuable to IETF. I mean, IETF standardized interfaces like UDP, TCP, BGP. And if there is an interface which is an interface cannot be abstract, it should be reasonable to see how you implement that interface. And if eBPF makes it feasible, like there is programmability aspect, there is aggregation aspect, there is inline aspect, then we would need their expertise to help write the doc for whatever it is they agree to support.
Oh no, like obviously we'll be discussing, like if we will start writing the RFC, we'll be discussing it with IETF people, right, to get the feedback. But let's say we went through the process, we published the RFC for whatever areas we discussed, right, and agreed upon. And then 1 year passes. What is a commitment from BPF community to support those documents? Like, is there any requirement? Do we need to update it like once every year or every half a year? How the evolution works for those documents once they're published? I know that we cannot change the RFC, so it will be either addendums to the RFC or new versions of the RFC. But is there any like commitments for us to do it, or it will be on a per request basis? And what will happen, for example, if we change the ISA completely? Like, we will decide that, okay, we like new format of ISA is appropriate.
Just to interrupt, sorry, Mykola, I have to run to, like, we're getting kicked out here.
That's fine.
But we will continue at the office hours.
Yeah, we should continue all this. We should answer all these questions.
Okay, bye-bye.
Cool. Thanks a lot, guys. See you.
Thank you.
Okay.
Yeah.